Welcome everyone. My name is Michelle Leffler and I am the Director of Paul Smith Library of Southern York County. We are here for the sixth and final in a series of talks on the 2020 Summer Read Selection, Option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. This powerful, inspiring, and practical book focuses on building resilience and moving forward after life's inevitable setbacks, including the current COVID-19 crisis. A summer read is a collaboration of WITF's Transforming Health, WellSpan Health, and over 80 libraries in central Pennsylvania. For more information, visit transforminghealth.org. This evening's topic is loneliness, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience, as well as a general book discussion. We will have a presentation followed by a discussion session. You are welcome to put your questions and comments in chat. We will be sure to share them. Our presenters from WellSpan Health are Tracy Van Marter and Abby Kramer. Tracy Van Marter has worked for WellSpan Health System for about 14 years as a health educator and now as a consumer engagement coordinator. She earned her degree from Elizabethtown College in Human Services. In the past, she has volunteered as a crisis counselor and an EMT. When she is not working, Tracy spends her time with her family. Tracy has been married to her best friend for almost 35 years. They have 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Plus, they have 2 very talkative German Shepherds that love to be with them every second of the day. Abby Kramer is a quality improvement coordinator for Aligning Forces for Quality. Abby finds joy in working collaboratively with patients, practices, and healthcare teams to provide the best quality of care for our communities. Abby began her career as a music teacher, where she also focused on programs to promote diversity and inclusion. Let's meet Tracy.
Hi, thank you everyone. And like I said, I do have 2 very talkative German Shepherds. Hopefully you won't hear them this evening. Hopefully they'll stay quiet for the presentation. But I will apologize before I get started in case they do talk a lot. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about loneliness. What the common definition is, it describes a state of solitude or being alone. Loneliness is actually a state of mind. It's defined by researchers as feeling lonely more than once a week. And we know that when it comes to being lonely in the health field, this does compromise other people's health conditions. So I did want to give you a lot of different statistics here, and this is a little wordy. I do apologize for that. But 47% of people are feeling socially isolated from their family and friends, and they struggle to maintain their health. And that was pre-COVID. We have seen those numbers increase a lot since COVID, since world has changed a lot and how we are having to make connections with people. It's good that we are getting out and about now, but there's still a lot of people that are very concerned about doing that. So we have seen the numbers in loneliness rise. So again, more than 1 in 4 Americans reported a lack of energy. They have difficulty sleeping or lack of exercise. Again, those are some of the statistics that are showing that you may start to be feeling some loneliness. Again, if you're feeling lonely, there is help out there. Like I said, there's numerous studies that are telling us more about people's health conditions and how it is being, your health is impacted by being lonely. You can switch to the next slide. So here are some of the impacts. There was a study done that we saw how heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, arthritis, any of those type of pain-related things, we've seen increase in that with people that are lonely. Psychological responses, people, again, like I said, they're not sleeping. We see people that are obese or they have more addictions. They have pre-indicators to premature death. And it's what's really interesting is loneliness shaves off about 8 years of longevity to somebody's life if they are constantly feeling lonely. And when it comes to the smoking with addiction, it's what they're calling the new smoking. loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that's the impact that it is having on somebody's health when they're constantly feeling lonely and not having that connection with somebody. Again, it elevates all those pain receptors, so people have more pain. And it's kind of a double thing. You have more pain, you don't want to do as much, you don't want to get out with people. We're seeing that it has impact on depression and anxiety. So we're seeing more hospital and doctor's visits. They're staying longer at the hospital, they're sicker. And again, it impacts their life in many different ways, not just being lonely, but the health and how long this goes on for in their life. What we're seeing with loneliness, it used to be that loneliness only affected what we thought was older people. Unfortunately, we're seeing this affecting a lot of our younger people today. And part of that is how many times we're out at the restaurant, or we're seeing our family, my granddaughters do the same thing. They're in the room with us and they're on their cell phones. So think about sometimes when you were out to dinner and you look across the room and you see somebody at the table, another couple, they're not talking. They're both on their cell phones. People are having lack of communication and that connectedness. People want connected. They want to feel connected, and not through their phones, but that's what our children are doing today. So we're seeing more and more people impacted by that loneliness by social media things or cell phones or computers. How many times, unfortunately we couldn't get together in person to have these meetings, we're doing them online. So it's hard sometimes to make that connection over a Zoom meeting or whatever, but it's what we have at this time. It's when this is ongoing is we're seeing really health effects out of that. You can switch to the next slide. So again, like I talked about here, we're seeing this becoming more common with the internet use, social media. Our younger people are more affected. We're seeing students become, peer pressures. They had enough peer pressures prior to this. Now we're seeing more and more of this. We're seeing this even in college students because of the way they're doing classes. A lot of times, a lot of our college students are doing online classes. They're not in the classroom. And today, this is really important. We're seeing this with even the schools, the way school has to deal with COVID. We're having children do classes online at home. So they're not getting that interaction with their friends. They're not being able to hang out with them. So we're finding that this is causing more low self-esteem with them. They're mistrust, they're unfriendly, they have less self-worth. So again, they're having lack of communication styles. They don't know how to always talk right because, like I said, my granddaughters on their cell phones, and when they text me, their language is completely different. They're not using the language that we see most people use. They're using these quick little words, and half the words I don't even know what they're talking when they're texting me. I have to ask them to explain it to me because their vocabulary is being affected by it. You go to the next slide. So part of this, when we talk about loneliness, one of the things that we have learned is how we talk about resilience. But before we get into resilience, I want to talk about adverse childhood experiences. And what this really means is there was a study done, I think it was in the around 1990, late 90s. This came out that they did this study and they had followed about 2,000 people, if I remember right, that they had them take this test. And they started with children. And they basically wanted to see how they rated on this test. And anybody can take this test. I have this link in the presentation that you can look at. It's like 10 questions. But what they found is that they were trying to link childhood trauma to long-term health and social consequences. So what that really means is when you answered this 10-question test, it would score the test. If the higher your number was, the higher trauma you had as a child. And so you answered the questions, and what they found, the higher those numbers is how much, they can predict that you're going to have health it would impact your health. So well, if you see somebody a score of like 8 or 10, you're going to see that they may have more health conditions early on. You may see they be in their 20s and have diabetes, or they may end up with cancer or anxiety or depression. So you look at those scores, and if we start looking at children and teenagers and young adults, we can maybe make some impact and change that we can really help with their health outcomes, first of all. Second of all, that we can get them some support from the trauma that they dealt with. Now, what the testing was done and based on is some of the questions were like, did you have your parents, one of them in prison? Did you have, did you see one of your parents being abused? So those type of questions is what they form some of the trauma on. And again, there's a lot more other trauma out there, but this was just the basis for this test. You can switch to the next slide. So like I said, there are 5 personal questions they asked: the physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, and emotional neglect. They wanted to find out some of these things about divorce, death, abandonment, and how that affected these people in the scoring. And like I said, here's the link that you can take a look at that. I assume that the link is available for you that you can take the test. You can go to the next slide. Go ahead. So when we talk about trauma, most people are unsure what trauma really means. So the definition is it's an individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by the individual as an overwhelming or life-changing psychological development. Basically, if it affects them in a bad way or some kind of impact, somebody may not know that they were really affected by their parents getting divorced. It may only show up later on. You can switch the slide. A lot of times when we talk about impact of trauma on behavioral triggers, you have external and internal responses. So think about a song. Think about it. It can be a good or a bad experience. Think about a song like that reminds you of your childhood. If you hear the song come on the radio or something playing, it takes you right back to where you were at that time when you first heard that event had that impact on you. Or think about a smell in the kitchen. If you think of, you smell spaghetti sauce or something, and if that's what your family made, it takes you right back to those events. But now think about that event. If you smell something, think of something, maybe a fire, somebody that dealt with a house fire. If they smell smoke burning, it takes them back to that event. So again, smell, sound, sight, touch, or taste is the external reminders of that event. The internal reminders are your emotions and thoughts. And what that means is, like I said, it brings up the things that happen in that event. You think about it. You may not consciously be aware of it, but it triggers certain things. So how do you change that? Well, become aware of it and think about how can you make it a positive thought. So you can switch to the next slide. Making it a positive thought is about being resilient. You can switch. So what is resilience? Well, it's the ability to bounce back from difficulties and bending, not breaking under pressure. Meaning that what kind of coping skills do you have? Well, we all have coping skills. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. One of the things when I get stressed is I like to eat chocolate. Some people may have gone, drinking a cup of coffee or smoking a cigarette is not always the best thing to do. Eating chocolate is not always the best thing to do. But again, what are some of those coping skills that people do? Yes, we should go cope and go exercise. But I'll tell you, I'm not one that likes to exercise. That's not going to work for me. But coming out with some coping strategies. Think resiliently. What does that mean? Well, let's see. How can we put a positive spin on something that is happening negative? We can always see the positive in it. It will make us feel that we can handle the pressure, that we can build resilience out of this. Use humor. How many times when you're feeling down, if you could just have that deep belly laugh, I mean, that laugh that makes you really laugh, put in a funny movie. We all smile, it seems like, when we see babies and they're doing these cute little things, or pets. Some of these things are what help us build that resilience. Nurture relationships and help others. At times, helping others helps us. When we're dealing with COVID, and I keep going back to COVID, and I apologize because I know a lot of us are over it, but with COVID, what we saw is if you could do something to help somebody else, it helped you not feel so lonely. It helped you not feel so helpless. We had a lot of people in nursing homes. One of the things we were saying is send them a card, send somebody a special message. I have to share, Abby and I are coworkers. Abby did this little thing for me that she doesn't realize how it brightened my day. She dropped this little package off on my porch, and I wasn't home, and I came home and I found this little gift. It was amazing. And those little things bring a lot of joy to somebody, and it doesn't have to be anything that costs anything, but it helps build resilience in ourselves. Again, look after your own physical well-being. We need to put ourselves first. We need to take care of ourselves, or we can't help others. So think about your physical well-being. What can you do for yourself? Have a sense of values, purpose, and meaning in life. When we don't have those, we see that people struggle. It doesn't mean you have to have a purpose in your job, but a purpose in life, meaning that, if you find purpose at going to church and helping people in church, then do that. If you find meaning in doing a daily reading every day, then do that. Anything that gives you positive reinforcement, do that. Know and use an activity, develop your strengths. So again, find something that personally works for you. Doesn't mean it's going to work for somebody else. Finding these life skills of meaning that what works for you may not work for somebody else, but you want to do things. It could be as simple as drinking more water. It could be taking a walk. You don't have to go out there and physically exercise and go run a marathon, but you know what? Stand up during the commercial at a TV and walk in place. Do you know how many steps you get in if you walk in place for a half hour during every commercial? You get a lot of time in because you realize how many commercials are on these TV shows. They're quite a lot. And keep learning and challenging yourself. Learn something new. You can do puzzles on the computer. If you don't want to do the computer, there's so many other things out there that you can learn something new. Read about something. Dream about taking a little trip. You can take trips on the computer and learn and educate yourself about a new place. It can be something here in the States. It can be in another country. But again, these are all things that help you build resilience. Now, when we talk about resilience, there is another survey out there that when people have taken the ACE study score, they then had them do the resilience survey. And this is, I think, a 20-question test. And basically, it points out, as an adult, if you take this test, it'll ask you, was there a teacher or somebody that you sit back and think who really made that impression on your life? Because what we've found through these studies is it takes one person to have impact on a child to change their life forever. So there was a psychologist, and he was talking to one of his clients, and this client was in a gang. And he asked him, he spent time with him, talked with him, went out of his way to really connect with him. And what they found doing these things is it takes one person to make that connection for somebody to really change, because a lot of times these children don't think that anybody cares. Another story from a friend of mine that is a psychologist, was basically this neighbor children, they were struggling, parents were getting divorced, there wasn't a lot of money for a lot of food. What she did was she used to make sure that they had food. And this was a big, she didn't think it was a big thing on her part. But what she found out later down the road, years down the road, when these kids were grown, they came back and said, you don't know how much this impacted my life. So it's these little things that we do in life that may seem so simplistic, but have such a major impact on somebody's life. It takes one person to show a child or another adult they care, and that helps build resilience. Next slide. So part of building resilience is listening and reading about other people's experiences. We can make connections and maybe not make a connection with that story. But we have this summer read book, and option B has helped some people really be more mindful and empowered to make changes within themselves, hearing about like Sandra's story. And again, there's other books out like that. So basically is think about other people, hear their stories, and if it resonates with you, can you implement that change in your own life? So now I'm going to turn it over to Abby, and she's going to talk just a little bit more about resilience.
Thank you, Tracy. All right, so I'm going to share with us some tools and tips that we found from option B. We are focusing tonight specifically on how to help people who we feel may be experiencing loneliness. And Michelle's going to share a little bit with us later about the importance of tonight. And then also the month of September is the National Month for Suicide Prevention and Awareness. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but we did want to highlight loneliness as part of what we are talking about tonight. So the first thing is, how can you tell if somebody may be feeling lonely? I'm sure that we've heard someone say, or we have felt this, that, I'm in a room with so many people and I've never felt so alone. Or I live with my family, we see each other every day and I just feel like I don't fit in here. I'm so lonely. So how do we know if somebody's feeling lonely? In general, lonely people spend more time alone. So some signs of loneliness may be if you talk to someone on a regular basis and then they start cutting back the amount of times that they talk to you, and then you're only hearing from them here and there. That may be a sign that they're experiencing some loneliness. They may become sad, anxious, or disconnected. If they were a person who used to take over the conversation or were very animated when they talk to you, you may notice that they're now not really getting involved in that conversation and not taking over topics the way that they would have before. Just be aware of that. And then also you want to take a look at what's been going on in their life. Has there been a big life change? Could have been loss of a loved one. Maybe there was a change at their job, change now going back to school may be different, or they are moving to a new location, maybe ending a relationship. So any of those things could be clues to let you know that someone near you may be feeling lonely. So once we've identified who these people are in our life, how can we support someone who's dealing with loneliness? And the first suggestion here has come up in several of our discussions about the book. In general, we want to make sure that we are listening and we are not advising. Be open, do not be judgmental, ask questions and listen. Don't interrupt and don't give advice that they didn't ask for. Part of our human nature is that we want to fix things. We want to, if we see a person who is dealing with a struggle, we want to fix that. We don't want to see them struggle. We want to give them the answer and make everything better. But that's not the purpose here. You want to just listen to them and hear what they have to say. Share an experience with them. Think about some experiences that you can do, that you can take them out, and you don't necessarily have to have a conversation. Sometimes that loneliness also makes it difficult to talk to someone else in the moment. So what can we do that we can be together but not have to talk all the time? So maybe go to a museum, go to a concert, go to a movie, something that you are able to experience with someone else without having to have that one-on-one conversation. The most important thing is that if you make plans with a person who's experiencing loneliness, that you stick to them. So if you make plans, make every effort that you can not to cancel or reschedule. One of the things that we talked about, Tracy shared, is the internal factors of trauma. So if you're experiencing loneliness, some of those internal feelings or emotions that you may have when someone calls to you, if you make a plan and you're not feeling lonely and you call and you say, hey, I can't come this week, we'll have to do it some other time, I'll just call you back later. It may just seem like no big deal, I'll call them back later, we'll get together, it'll be fine. To that person, it may be, I told you, nobody cares about me and they don't want to come now anyway, so I'm not really that important. So you just want to make sure if you're going to make plans with someone who's experiencing loneliness that you do everything that you can to make sure that you follow through. And then how can I make a connection? So this is outside of just inviting someone somewhere. You want to make a connection with them that they are feeling valued, they are feeling supported, and you may be the first person that they really have felt cared about them in a long time. If this is someone who's experiencing loneliness and has experienced it and not been open about it. So some of the ways that you can connect are connect through some creativity. So what ways can we express how we're feeling, things that we can do together, share some photos, some videos, some poems. I know that there are events that you can do I forget what, like sip and paint events that you go to and they have wine and you paint pictures. They have some of them that are for couples that each of you paint a half of a painting, and when you're finished in the evening, you have one complete picture that has both sides of a story. So that's one way through creativity that you can share some time. Volunteer together. So feeling like the two of you have contributed to something, or bring them into, if your family is doing something, bring them into that and help someone else. So being able to contribute somewhere else with other people will help you to feel that you've done something greater than yourself, and it will help you to feel more connected in general to other people, not just the person who's invited you to volunteer. And then finally, be patient. Loneliness can really work the way that somebody's experience of a relationship is, because they're afraid of getting hurt. They have this internal dialogue on a daily basis about how they don't matter and they're not important. So the way that they interact with you and things that they say to you may not be something that you are used to hearing. Be patient, be open to that, and ask questions. So try to just listen and not judge. All right, and then finally, before I turn it back over to Michelle, I just wanted to one more time, with our final discussion on the book, reiterate that resiliency is not something that either you have or you don't have. Resilience is like a muscle, you can build it. So if you are really struggling in this area and feeling like you're waiting for the next shoe to drop, you can work tiny, tiny steps and build that resiliency. So it's just a matter of knowing how to do it. And we've given you lots of tips, lots of tools over the last 6 weeks. And all of the videos will be available to you at any time. So along with the resource list. So please, anytime that you need any of those, take a look at the videos again, or also take a look at the Option B website. Tons of resources there. They have lots of great e-greetings and all kinds of things. So even though our discussions may be ending, resiliency is something that you can continue to work on. And we are here for you along with the library system. So please reach out. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle for questions.
Okay, before we get started on questions, I just want to mention the importance of today, September 10th. Today is World Suicide Prevention Day, and many people know somebody who has taken their own life. Still others know someone who has lost a friend or family member. World Suicide Prevention Day gives us time to reflect on the value of life, and that no matter how bad things seem, there's always hope. There are, on average, 123 suicides each day in this country. It's the 10th leading cause of death in America, second leading for ages 25 to 34, and the third leading cause of death in ages 15 to 24. In order to create awareness and strengthen the fight against suicide, The entire month of September is Suicide Prevention Month. You can participate in the fight by getting involved with local organizations and listening to those who need help. And if you would like to participate in World Suicide Prevention Day today, please feel free to light a candle and place it in a window as we close our program this evening. And I see in the chat that it is also Are You OK Day, and that was started in Australia in 2009. So thank you for sharing that with us as well, because that is one I did not know. And as Karen said, it does go hand in hand with Suicide Prevention Day. So does anyone have any questions specifically to our topics tonight on adverse childhood experiences or on loneliness? I have one to get started if no one else has one. So I'm going to go ahead and ask mine, and if you have a question, just type it in the chat and I will share it for our experts to answer. But the one that I have is specifically if you're wanting to reach out to someone who's experiencing loneliness, but you don't live near them. What is a way, I mean, other than Zoom and social media that we all do, how can you specifically reach out to someone who doesn't necessarily live close enough that you can go out with and schedule something like a museum date or whatever?
Okay. Well, there are many things, unfortunately, with COVID, we've had to be creative. So we can go back to old school and talking on the phone is one. It doesn't have to be that you are physically in the room. Again, Abby have mentioned about you can be in a room full of people and still feel lonely. It's about that connection. So when I talk about connection, it's about really hearing somebody, really helping them through a situation, or just understanding why they're feeling lonely. Again, it goes hand in hand with anxiety and depression is what we're finding more and more. So sometimes it's just having conversations with them. It doesn't have to be person to person or Zoom, because over the phone, you can still reach out and talk to somebody. Abby, you have something you want to add?
Sure. I think the other thing that I would add, and that I have really started doing myself, is to send old school snail mail. I like to send a card with 2 or 3 sentences to that person, just letting them know how important they are to me, that I miss seeing them, but I'm glad that we are safe. Just reassuring them that they are someone who is important in my life. And then I also will try to find a quote or something that I feel speaks to me about that person and put it in the card, so that it's usually like the size of a business card or smaller. So if it's something that really speaks to that person, they can carry it with them. And if they're feeling sad or they're feeling lonely, they can look at that and remember, you know what, I mean something to this person. So it doesn't always, you know, there's other options there too outside of technology. And I think we have a big population that maybe does not have access to technology the way that a lot of us do.
Thank you. We also have a question in chat. Concerning helping an isolated or lonely person, the resilient person is present to provide support to the lonely, isolated person. What are ways to break the cycle of 2 friends who are both lonely, isolated, and thus are struggling at being supportive of the other person?
Abby, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. So I think when we are dealing with 2 people that are struggling together, it is a dynamic that is difficult to get through. We talk a lot about how you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can care for someone else. But if the 2 people that are caring for each other are both struggling so much that they can't put that oxygen mask on, they need to be able to. This is when it's important for those people who are in their lives outside of those 2 people to recognize and acknowledge, what are the signs that I'm seeing that these people are showing me that they're lonely. This may be something that it needs to be an external thing, but I think definitely the opportunity there would be that one of them or both of them may need to look for some community support, some behavioral health outreach. And that's the other thing, that when loneliness starts as feeling lonely, but it goes into that realm of, now I'm really having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. I'm having a difficult time getting a shower. I forgot to eat today. Those are times that we need to acknowledge and recognize that I may need some support outside of just friendship. And these are some behavioral health resources that can help me.
Absolutely. Abby kind of hit that all there. One of the things is, a lot of times when you have one lonely person, and if they're depressed, it could bring out the other person's depression, and they kind of feed off of each other. So yes, they will need outside resources to help them with that. They'll need those separate resources. So it's not something they can always do together. The other thing is, there are so many, depending on the age group, there are more things out there for elderly people, seniors, that they can get out senior groups and get them separated a little bit, or get them some other friends. You also have the Meals on Wheels is a great thing. A lot of times when people drop off the meals, part of they're looking for that loneliness, that they can have a conversation with them. So they get that daily interaction. So again, there are other things out there, but I think the biggest key here is realize they probably will need outside resources, and they can't lean on, they need more help from a professional, basically.
Thank you. I have another question. This one is specific to adverse childhood experiences. What can you do if you are the person that experienced something adverse in your childhood and you need support and you're not getting it? How can you reach out to your support network for that?
Well, it depends on what the trauma was, if you dealt with it. Sometimes your support is not necessarily your friends. You may need professional support. So what I'm meaning is, there are other support groups out there. You can reach out to behavioral health. There's a lot of different resources out there to help you manage and navigate life. There are life coaches out there to help you navigate. So it depends on, and unless I know, the details, it's a little hard to guide you. But my suggestion is, if you're having a hard time navigating, is to reach out to somebody to help you start that navigation.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions specific to the topic? And if not, does anyone want to discuss anything on resilience as a whole, as it relates to option B?
Yeah. Hi, Michelle. I just want to make a comment about COVID-19 and people who, I should just say myself, okay? I didn't know that I was lonely until I was home from work for 3 months. And yes, I talked to people online and I talked to people on the phone, but I can't tell you, when I met somebody at the mailbox, that I just stood there and had to talk about anything for, a couple of minutes, because I don't think I ever realized how important that was until this happened to all of us. So I'm sure that everybody was going through that, being at home for the first time in, maybe ever, for being home that long.
I will definitely stick my hand up there and say me too. Because I am very select in the people I socialize with, but when I couldn't even get out and see those few people, it was really tough. And I mean, it's getting a little better now, but it's still, we can't just go out and hang out anytime or whatever. So yeah, I totally relate to that, and I will not be ashamed to say I'm right there with you.
And this is Susan, and I want to agree with Karen and Michelle, because even though I thought I was coping well, I had the same experience with a neighbor who was walking her dogs. All of a sudden, I just felt the need to talk to somebody and get my thoughts out. And I think that you in your daily life, you don't recognize how stressed you are until something that normally wouldn't send you over the edge or set you on edge happens, and your response is overly inflated. And then it's like, oh, now wait a minute, I didn't realize I was that upset that, this pushed me over the edge and made me respond in a way that normally I wouldn't have. So it's recognizing too that you can have these responses and be resilient so that you can calm yourself down and refocus yourself. If that makes sense.
And I just want to throw something in here as well. It's important when you see yourself being lonely like that and having trouble coping with not being able to socialize like you normally would, to actually seek that out when you notice it, because if you just do what the tendency is to just start sharing with a neighbor or whatever at the mailbox, or you see somebody in the grocery store or whatever, you might have a tendency to overshare things that, one, they don't want to know and don't need to know, and that you then may be embarrassed later, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that, kind of thing. So, I mean, just seeking it out ahead of time, people to talk to, even if it is on social media or old school over the phone, but just reaching out and doing something proactively.
And Michelle, a lot of what you're talking about has to do with mindfulness. And Tracy and I do a lot of work with our teams at WellSpan to talk about mindfulness, and basically, just to give you a quick rundown of what mindfulness is, it's experiencing things in the moment, trying not to think about what's going to happen in the future, trying not to worry about the things you should have done in the past, but where am I at right now and what's happening? And one of the big things that we talk about with mindfulness is acknowledging and naming an emotion that you're feeling, something that's going on. So after you have that conversation that you're talking a lot, and even during that time, to acknowledge that and say, I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling scared right now, or whatever that emotion is, give it a name. And that will help you to see a little bit closer into maybe what else is going on behind it.
I agree. And it's, as you were saying, putting a name on it helps you to know what it is. And so you can actually take those proactive steps that you might not normally think of if you didn't have a name for how you're feeling. So yeah, it's not necessarily to say, oh, I don't want to say something embarrassing, or, oh my gosh, I did. But if you do that ahead of time and you know what's going on with how you're feeling, then you're more likely to avoid that before it comes up anyway.
Right. One of the things about loneliness is, for some people, COVID has really brought up this topic for a lot more people than what they realize. But part of this too is with loneliness. We have had people that have been lonely before COVID, and they don't know how to get themselves out of that spinning of being loneliness. They don't know how to be mindful because they don't have those coping skills. And that goes back to this adverse childhood experiences. A lot of times, if they didn't have somebody in their life to help them build that resilience, it's what the resilience is what helps us, brings us out of some of that loneliness. We can start, like Abby said, being mindful, naming the feelings. But majority of the time, most of us, we don't want to feel, because we have this illusion that if we feel something, that we're going to fall apart. Because most times, if we're upset, we fear something, or we're upset, You know, nobody died of crying. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be angry, you know, but it's working through those emotions that will get us out of that loneliness. And again, be more mindful, as Abby said.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, I'll ask one that's specific to the book in general and not this specific topic. But why is it so hard to talk about hard things? Why do we find that so difficult?
I think a lot of that revolves around other people's perceptions. That if I am honest about how I'm feeling or honest about something that I went through, that I would be judged or I would be looked at differently by those around me.
That makes sense. And I'll say, for me personally, that's true. Again, I'll just be, you know, transparent there. That's me.
Yeah, I think fear holds us back holds people back from a lot of things. About feeling, about doing an activity, about anything, because again, we're tend to put a lot into our fears and we let them get the best of us. So I think having those hard conversations or hard, you know, thinking about that stuff, it's all based out of fear.
Also in the book, I know Sheryl Sandberg spoke about actually doing something for somebody instead of asking what they need. In terms of somebody who has experienced adverse childhood experiences, what is something that you can just do for them without asking what they need because they may not know what they need?
Trace, did you want to start?
Sure. That can be a double-edged sword.
I'm sure.
Because you're right. Sometimes people don't know what they need. And then sometimes what happens is we tend to think we know what somebody needs. So, you know, I always say the best thing sometimes is ask if they're not sure, is maybe explain that you're going to do this. And the reason I say this, I had taken this this class at the Lancaster Hub on poverty. And one of the things is the school district, that there was this poor child in the school district. They realized that this family didn't have a refrigerator. So the school, this was a local school district, pulled money, I think it was the PTO, pulled some money together and they bought this family a refrigerator. Well, the next week, after they delivered this refrigerator to this family, these kids weren't in school. So when they got back to school the next week, they said, what happened? You know, why weren't you in school? They said, oh, well, we went on vacation. Mom and Dad sold the refrigerator so they could go on vacation. So the PTO people got upset, or, you know, who did this? And then when you really stop and think about this family learned to deal without a refrigerator. They coped for how long time? So this was not important to them. What was important to them is, now I have some money that I can go do something fun with my family. So what I'm getting at with this is, if somebody doesn't know and we do something for them, it may not be the right thing. And that's good and bad. It's just, I think the best is always to ask. If they don't know, maybe make a suggestion or whatever, because sometimes when we do something, we may not see how this affects them. And like the story is, they didn't need the refrigerator. They learned to cope in life without a refrigerator. It wasn't important to them. What is important to them is not necessarily what we see as important, or we see it different. Again, it's about perception. So again, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Abby, do you have more to add to that one?
No, I agree. Sometimes it is asking. But the other thing that we talked about in the book is that if you say, oh, hey, is there anything that I can do? And you make it a generalized statement, 90% of the time, you're going to hear, no, there's nothing. I'm okay. There's nothing. I think from the standpoint of adverse childhood experiences, what came to mind with me was if you're aware that maybe in an example, you know someone whose adverse childhood experience was neglect, and they were somebody who parents left them, no one was around, they had to fend for themselves. Probably what I would do for that person is make sure that I'm checking in with them at least once or twice a week to see how they're doing, to let them know that they're important to me. So it really is with adverse childhood events, it really is person to person, what their experience was, how that impacted their life. And, you know, sometimes you got to come at it cautiously instead of coming at it with the answer. Come at it with, you know, here are 3 things that I'm going to do this week. Do you want to do one of them with me? Why don't you come along here? So give them some choices, but do, you know, what would work better for you? Give them that option that they can see where they would like that help to be.
Thank you. And we have another question for the topic tonight. Some people are naturally introverted and isolate because that is where they feel most comfortable. Is there any way to tell if someone is just an introverted person versus someone who is suffering from the isolation that they are in?
Yeah, there is. Isolation or loneliness is different from introverted. When people don't get out and do certain things, I mean, personality traits do affect people in some aspects. But if you really know the person, you will know that they are struggling. You know, there's certain events or certain things that are going on that you know they really like this, and in the past they did X, Y, and Z. Well, they're not doing that now. Or if they're introverted, yes, you know, that's how they always are. They're not one to get up and sing in front of a group. You know, that's a whole different thing. But if they're used to attend a concert and they don't do those things anymore, they may be more lonely and disconnected. So I think you have to look at the person individually and kind of look, if you know them, what you can see those differences, if you can kind of single that out a little bit, if that's making any sense. I know it's difficult.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions they would like to ask? Okay, if not, then we will go ahead and end our presentation tonight. And I would like to thank Tracy Van Martyr and Abby Kramer for sharing information about being resilient during times of loneliness, as well as in dealing with adverse childhood experiences. And thank you each one for being here this evening to participate with us. Please take a few moments to give us some feedback by completing the survey about this summer read selection. A survey may be picked up and completed at your local library or can be found online at transforminghealth.org. While at transforminghealth.org, enter to win an autographed copy of Option B and register to attend WITF's A Summer Read Beyond the Pages. This live virtual special event with authors Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant will take place on Tuesday, September 29th at 7 p.m. This free event is open to the public, but pre-registration is required. And also, just remember that it is World Suicide Prevention Day, so please feel free to light a candle in just a few moments at 8 p.m. and put it in a window so that other people are able to see it as well. Stay safe and stay connected to your library. Have a great night.